is Aretha doing?
Aretha's doing all right.
Just all right.
Singing is sacred, and you shouldn't do it just because somebody wants you to. What's most important is that you are treated with dignity and respect.
You're special, Ree. You have a talent they call genius.
You better think about what you're trying to do to me.
How old is she?
She's 10, but her voice is going on 30, honey.
Think, let my go, let yourself be free.
How many albums have you had?
4.
And no hits.
I need you to focus and avoid frivolous distractions.
Hello, and welcome to Mix Presents Sound for Film and Television Awards season. I'm Tom Kenny, the editor of Mix Magazine, and we're here today to talk about Respect, the Aretha Franklin biopic with the Queen of Soul portrayed so fantastically by Jennifer Hudson. It debuted in mid-August theatrically. It was directed by Liesl Tommy, a debut directorial effort, and a couple of people that we'll mention right off the bat. It was edited at C5 in New York, supervised by Philip Stockton, who could not be with us today. And it was mixed at C5 and at Warner Brothers in New York by Paul Hsu, who is with us today. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. We also have Suzana Peric, who Paul calls the best music editor in New York City, and Stephen Bray out of Los Angeles, who served as music producer for the film. We have 20 minutes here, so with all due respect to dialogue and effects, we're going to talk about music. This is Aretha Franklin, quite a legacy. And we start with the songs. Stephen, I have to imagine that though we cover a period from 1952 to 1972, there's a lot of songs to choose from. What's the intent here? What's the overall goal?
Storytelling. And Liesl is a genius, because she comes from theater. And she knows how to weave story and song in a way that the stories are, while you're hearing songs, you're really hearing story. And so she was able to do the double duty of, if you see a film about Aretha Franklin, you expect to hear certain things that, just are synonymous with her. So, from the beginning of her finding her creative voice, Never Loved a Man, actually going back further than that, the very beginning is church for her. She obviously was born into, a church family. Her mother was one of the greatest gospel singers. Her surrogate stepmother, Clara Ward, was an amazing singer. She's listening to Mahalia Jackson all the time. So she's coming from there. So obviously Liesl knows, well, we're starting in church, right? And it should be mentioned that Sky Turner, who gives us our introduction to young Aretha, it was phenomenal from the beginning. And so that this is all Liesl's genius in terms of figuring out not only what are the songs you want to hear, what are the songs that help move the story along. So I think, Never Loved a Man was her creative sort of, maybe her birth of like blending all of that church with a secular kind of a vibe. And, hats off to Ted White for apparently finding that song. And then it becomes sort of like a story of her relationships, really, because you go from that to Do Right Woman. If you want to do right woman, you better be a do right man, to You Better Respect Me, to You Make Me Feel Good, Dr. Feel Good. It's all storytelling, and it works so well.
And by Europe, you have Freedom on the Paris stage, I believe. All parallel with
Think.
You think, yeah. Now, this period, though, starts in a living room with My Baby Likes to Bebop. You mentioned the 7-year-old Aretha. Paul, a lot of these songs take place in a living room with a piano. It even starts out with a single piano, I believe. And she gets out of bed and comes sing My Baby Loves to Bebop. Sort of progression in the environment and fitting music into these spaces. Can you talk about that at the mix? How you progress?
Yeah, I mean, despite your appropriate dismissal of dialogue and effects, for me it's really in this kind of movie. in this movie, particularly the dialogue and the voice, those that's the foreground. That's the forefront of what really needs to be happening. And so, as Stephen was saying, the story is so important because the character's speaking, but then singing. And how do we bridge that effortlessly? And, the performers, I mean, Jennifer and the surrounding cast, I mean, these are some of the great singers of our generation, right? They can sing like nobody's business. So it's about keeping those performances keeping the integrity of those performances as much as possible. And as you said, the spaces grow and, we become more reverberant. We open things up. But for me, it's about making that connection between, the emotion of the scene, which is delivered by dialogue, straight into the performance. And if we can make that transition feel as effortless as possible, hopefully we're feeling like, like we're there, which I think is the point, because the feeling of being in those spaces is overwhelming. I think if we're actually there.
Oh, absolutely. Suzana, at some point, these have to be fit into a movie. We have stunning songs. We have a stunning story, and somebody has to do the job of putting them in the movie, huh? When do you start to become involved, and how do you start working with the team?
Well, I inherited this job. There was a really fantastic music editor who put all the original playback recordings and matched them to the production, Annette Kudrak, and she paved the way to so that we had songs intact. All of the songs were recorded in their entirety, which gave the picture editing such flexibility in terms of telling the story, as Stephen was saying, through those songs. So in general, a music editor would get involved during the production and before the production, because there is a period of playback recordings where a music editor would be present and work together with Stephen and his team, so that there is a continuity, in such a musically heavy performance-wise film that you would need all hands on board from before anything starts, actually. Then, after the initial, construction of all of Jennifer Hudson recorded on set live. And those were the performances that we actually ended up using. So she sang a long playback. Stephen was there present all the time. But her performances were obviously enhanced while she was actually in character. And so when Liesl and Avril, an amazing picture editor who took this film from its initiation to this full-fledged, beautiful story, together with Liesl, they chose some of the best acting-wise performances, which then now we needed to make sure, and Stephen led the team, Stephen and Jason, making sure that those live takes were also musically as perfect as her performance. So from the picture editing room to the music editing room to the hands of the music experts and producers, Stephen and Jason, to make sure that all of the package is as good as it's supposed to be.
Stephen, I'd like to return to this set because I knew she was singing live. I didn't realize you used all those live performances in the final mix. But could you give me an overview about the playback? I mean, this is a long way from a thumper track on the set with a quiet thing. This is full blown. What's the setup like?
Well, we mentioned just to give credit to the music team. Harvey Mason is at the sort of top of the tree, and I'm so blessed to have been given the opportunity, because he's so busy, to have been brought into this project. And then Jason Michael Webb, as Suzana mentioned a couple of times, the secret weapon for any music project, anytime. Get Jason and you'll be fine, because Jason played a lot of the on-set piano live so that we could be flexible. If Liesl said, we need to change that, it needs to be faster, it needs to be slower, we could do it. Although we had the pre-records because we went through the process of Jennifer really getting Aretha's phrasing into her body. So we did spend a lot of time pre-recording with the same person who was our playback mixer, Alex Lowe. And so Alex and the team recorded everything just really as training for Jennifer. And then we threw all that away in terms of the vocals because she did in fact sing live. I think the only time I think we probably used a take, for subsequent takes, maybe, but we never really had to rely on the pre-records because she's just so dynamic and so amazingly, in the moment. It was fantastic. And that goes for the sisters too, Saquon, Haley, and Brenda playing the sisters and cousin were all singing live as well. Because I'll admit that when Liesl said to me, I want to use all of this sound audio, I said, sure. Yeah, okay. Knowing that I was going to have to recreate it after the fact, which we were prepared to do, but we didn't have to because that's how good everybody is.
How did you record her vocal live then? Was there a separate truck on the set or something, or how did you do that?
No, poor Ed White. Ed White, he only had eight tracks, and doing it. If we had to do it again, I would say, yeah, let's have a truck and let's have 24 tracks. But he managed to do it. Fortunately, there was only the four main vocals and then of course boom and whatnot. But Jason was the one who did that sort of meticulous work of matching vocal takes to what Avril and Liesl chose to see. Then Jason had to find the correct takes to match that. But in Jennifer's case, they were all good. So we didn't have to dig too far.
For the astute, if you read between the lines of what Stephen's saying, the vocals, yes, were central. And with a performer like Jennifer, I mean, every take is going to be incredible and at another level. But then what you guys did was recreate instrumentals around that, which are all replayed. And that is a key part.
That's true.
Key part.
That's true. We did have a band that was more than capable of playing this music on set. And they were fantastic, almost distractingly so, because they would play and jam between every camera setup. They'd give us everything from the original music to Prince to Mahavishnu Orchestra. Those guys can play anything. But so they look the part when they're playing. But then yes, Paul's right. We did with Stuart Larriman, fantastic engineer. We recorded some amazing musicians, James Genus and Sean Pelton, Clay, our guitarist, and just a host of fantastic musicians. And that process was bizarre because of the pandemic.
Yes, I was going to say we were right in the middle of the pandemic, so the learning system how to be together while we're not together. And also Stephen and Jason conducting the band via Zoom from Los Angeles with us in New York studio. So pretty amazing.
I set up, I think 5 different monitors and computers so that I could see the drummer and the guitar. So I could see everybody on their Zoom feeds. And then we used audio movers to listen in. But thank God, for Stuart being so good and kind of quarterbacking that whole situation for us. And Suzana, you were there for a lot of it too. So thank you.
Yeah, I was in the studio.
And that's a real special part of the film, I think, for anyone who comes from a musical background, that feeling of being in the studio as the songs are created, I think is one of the really special parts of the movie.
Because I was there with the musicians, and a lot of them that Stephen and Jason and Stuart gathered actually played with Aretha. And so for them to revisit those songs now that they played with her, they gave it all. So it was pretty emotionally very charged also because their performances came with so much background and so much memory of her and her spirit.
Hats off to Sandy Park for
that's right, Sandy Park,
wrangling all that beautiful,
Exactly.
that fantastic talent.
Exactly.
Yes.
And those musicians, speaking of, we see a lot of musicians in recording studios. We are Mix Magazine. It's a lot of fun with Aretha. I think she's sort of timid, and there's an orchestra at her first recording session, and she goes inside the studio, and there's a bit of wonder. Paul, Suzana, how did you handle the recording studio scenes? That feel, you spend time in studios. What was it? What would they feel like?
I think it's a question of, Liesl, the director, has also spent time in studios as well. And so it's really, I noticed the notes that came back from producers who didn't have a music background versus those of us who do. It was about riding that line of recreating it to really feel exactly like it feels, right? Which is probably wider and a little messier than you might imagine, versus the layperson. And so we definitely, during temp mixes, we played with that line of like, okay, so if we pan the intercom over there, or the person on the talkback, is a person who's never been in a studio going to get that? And so it was a process really of like finding where that line is, because those of us who spend a lot of time there, instantly we know, and those who haven't may not get it right away. So it was definitely a process of finding where that line was.
That reminds me that, there was also the sort of dialogue about the fact that we're in 1967, and some people thought, everything should sound thin, and like you're listening to a record, and we're like, no, if you're in the room, it doesn't. But
that's great, Stephen, because you and I have never actually had that conversation, but we had that conversation separately with certain individuals, and the answer is very simple.
Yes,
it sounded pristine. With the expletive removed.
Right. And also there was an instance also where the questions were made whether, as the film goes into the documentary style during a performance of a song, should then we treat the song as well as if it were coming from the little, so coming back, which we had to, kind of take away that comment in some way, because the song would suffer from that. And movie magic.
I'd like to focus on since the movie's called Respect, I would like to focus sort of on one scene and just sort of have you all kick in on it. The Madison Square Garden, we lead up, and she's singing with her sisters in the living room, working out her take on the Otis Redding hit, and then we have this magnificent debut in a white gown at Madison Square Garden. Stephen, how was it set up there? Suzana, Paul, what happened after Stephen took it?
Well, I'll just quickly say that, again, Liesl, can't say enough about her. She really wanted that storytelling about the sisters. Well, Aretha's creativity, her interpretation of that song obviously kind of turned it inside out. But that scene with her in the middle of the night playing that piano, and the sisters sort of supporting her in finding it and kind of encouraging her, because she, Aretha was not necessarily emboldened, at that time. And so Liesl really wanted us to see how the sisters really helped her find her voice. And then the transition and that's so deftly handled by Paul and Suzana into the studio and cutting that thing so that we didn't have to worry about, thank you, Suzana, we didn't have to worry about, they've cut like on a half beat, and now we have a song that has, a bar that has 3.5 beats as opposed to 4. So, but moving into the studio and into the stage was deftly handled by Paul and Suzana.
Well, I also wanted to say that in those, in these instances when when picture was being edited, we were really fortunate to be working with an editor who was so sensitive to that she would always actually, Avril, and I still don't know how to pronounce her last name, Bukes or Bukes, I can't remember. I'm not sure that I am correct, but in any case, she would actually call us and ask our advice. And so in some complex situations where there had to be an edit in a song, and so that we would, and she would actually, when we would correct it, she would actually adjust the picture so that so it was a really full all-around teamwork to make this sound as real as possible, so that there were no cutting corners.
Paul, that starts in like a living room. and it certainly shows, and they're working it out, like you say, from the piano. How do you, in a mix, sort of take that from the living room to the triumphant? How do you build that? How do you pace that?
It's really, I don't know. To me, the comparison is always very strong for me of being a DJ in a club where you have technical tools that you can employ, and hopefully we're going from a scene, a straightforward scene, which is sort of verite in a way, right, to something which allows a lot of bigness, but it's really about pulling that thread in such a way that when I look to my right at Liesl, I hope that she just has her jaw dropped and she's just can't believe what she heard. And that's really what it comes down to, is like, it's, you can only make it louder or quieter. You can only add less reverb or more reverb, but how much and exactly when, and finding that emotional thread of like where you do it is really the thing. And to Suzana alluded to this a little bit. I think it's worth noting that, this is a film about a strong Black woman directed by a Black woman. And there were a lot of women in the key roles, and that makes a massive difference during the process. Like, it's that scene
written by as well.
Exactly. And that particular area, the element of post-production, which thankfully is changing a little bit, is dominated by older white males. And being in an environment where we've got Suzana and Avril and Liesl, like it truly makes a difference. And so at that point, my job is really just following their lead. What's the vibe and the emotion that we're going for in those scenes, and employing the technical tools to get there.
Well said, Paul. I think Jerry Garcia once said, "That's right, the women are smarter." A fantastic job throughout. I mean, all these scenes, I must say, as a viewer, the recording studios, the stage scenes, the living room performances, all sounded fantastic. I mean, they felt natural and within the scope of the movie. And yet we also have to integrate a score into this, which is not so easy. Chris Bowers did a magnificent job with the score. That's not always easy in a musical biopic or a musical. Suzana, can we start with you? How do you play with such iconic sound of these songs with a sort of a lush and tasty score?
Well, I think what the key to that, I think, was that in our initial discussions, because the story is so much told through her songs, there was nothing really that needed to be said more. So that the part that was deep down inside her, that is revealed in flashbacks and in moments of her solitude, those were the only parts that the score was going to explore. And because of that, there was a freedom of choosing the language of the music, whether there could have been a road where Chris could have gone into her vocabulary. However, he chose to go into a more introspective vocabulary of the music, and we always stayed true to those moments, never describing what is happening on the screen, but always staying with moments of her reflection.
No, I was going to say, I think it's a very common and rightfully so idea that the whole idea of sound design and music blending, which is in a way what we're talking about, score and songs blending, and that is a real element of filmmaking. But a lot of times it's exactly what Suzana's describing, which is the opposite, like a sort of rigorousness of no, nothing's going to go there because we don't need anything there. And making those choices, to Liesl's credit, is a big part of why it works.
Speaking of best cues of the whole movie, you must still be singing some of these songs. I've been on dub stages. You heard these songs a lot. What one's still running around in your head? And I think Suzana,
ain't no way.
With you.
Ain't no way that it ain't no way.
Yeah. I have two, because ain't no way was my favorite moment, because I felt that we really had achieved that goal of time machine, time travel, where it really felt like you kind of looked around the set and it felt like, wait a minute, we're here. Or where are we? Are we in Atlanta, or are we in Muscle Shoals? And the Kramer's photography, just the lighting, the set design was just so beautiful that I really was transported. And then of course that horn arrangement that I'm guessing Arif Martin probably did was just, and those musicians were, one thing we haven't talked about is that we hired people who we couldn't record the musicians because of the union says, are you hiring musicians or are you hiring actors? Because we have to know, because there's a different deal. So we hired them as extras, although they could play. And so we got to hear them. And so it was truly magical when we did Ain't No Way. But then Baby, Baby, Sweet Baby is one of my favorites of all time. And that one, I'm so glad we got it into that montage, because that's the earworm of them all for me.
And that took a while. That was a different song, then another song, and finally we got the I think when Stephen and Jason rearranged the song and did it at a different tempo, it suddenly felt like it was part of that celebration of the beginning of her success.
Well, we know that was one of the ones where it was tricky because we had boom mic sound that it was in Jennifer's mic. And so Irma was bleeding into Aretha. And so we had to be super careful about that. And yeah, but Sakan nailed it.
I think one thing you certainly walk with the performances are stunning. I mean, from the opening with the little, as played Aretha as a girl.
Dakota.
Dakota.
Yeah.
All the way through to the church at the end with the whole family back together again. I want to thank you all. Thank you, Suzana. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Paul. It's a most excellent example of a musical biopic you're likely to see in the way that songs are integrated. So I congratulate you. Really enjoyed the film. Good luck on the short list. Go out and vote tomorrow, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Such a wonderful
Thank you.
Guys.
Good to see everybody. Good to see you.